The city lights of Chicago glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of ambition and secrets. From the penthouse apartment, they looked like scattered diamonds, cold and distant. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and unspoken words. He was a man who had everything: a booming tech empire, a beautiful wife, and a child on the way. But as he stood on the precipice of his greatest professional triumph, he made a choice that would shatter his perfect world. He brought her, the other woman, to the celebration, a brazen display of arrogance. What he didn't know was that his pregnant wife, watching from the shadows, was about to make a life-changing decision of her own. The penthouse on the 87th floor of the St. Regis was less a home and more a statement. It was a declaration of success, etched in floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, and the hushed, climate-controlled air that smelled faintly of jasmine and money. For Olivia, it had once been a dream, a fairy tale castle in the sky she shared with her prince, Ethan. Now, 7 months pregnant and feeling more like a decorative object than a wife, it was a gilded cage. Ethan was a man sculpted by ambition. His company, Innovate, was the darling of the tech world, and he was its charismatic king. He moved with a restless energy, his mind always 3 steps ahead, his eyes fixed on a horizon only he could see. Olivia had fallen for that energy, for the way he made her feel like the center of his universe. But as his empire grew, his universe expanded, and her place in it seemed to shrink. Their mornings had a familiar rhythm. Ethan would be up before the sun, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone, already conquering markets and crushing competitors before his first cup of coffee. Olivia would wake to the silence of his absence, the other side of the king-sized bed already cold. She'd find a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen island next to a perfectly ripe avocado and a prenatal vitamin. "Big day. Love you. E." She would spend her days in a haze of prenatal yoga classes, meetings with the interior designer for the nursery, and long, lonely walks along the lakefront. The city was a vibrant, bustling beast, but she felt strangely invisible within it. She was Mrs. Ethan Hayes, a title that was supposed to be a key to the city, but felt more like a label on a beautiful, fragile possession. The promotion party was all Ethan could talk about for weeks. It was a celebration of Innovate's new partnership with a global conglomerate, a deal that would cement his legacy and make him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. He wanted everything to be perfect. The guest list was a who's who of Chicago's elite. The catering was by a Michelin-starred chef, and the theme was "The future is now." "You'll wear the blue dress," he'd said one evening, not looking up from his tablet. "The one from the charity gala. It makes you look ethereal." Olivia had looked down at her swollen belly, the blue silk of the dress a distant memory. "Ethan, I'm not sure it will fit." He'd finally looked up, his brow furrowed in mild annoyance. "Then have it altered. Or buy a new one. Just make sure it's blue. It's the company's color." The conversation, like so many others, had left her feeling hollow. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing a reflection of himself, an accessory to his success. The pregnancy, which had initially thrilled them both, had become another project for him to manage. He'd hired the best doctors, the most sought-after doula, and a night nurse for after the birth. He'd taken care of everything, except for her. The day of the party, a nervous energy buzzed through the penthouse. Ethan was a whirlwind of phone calls and sharp commands, his tailored suit a second skin. Olivia moved around him like a satellite, her attempts at conversation met with distracted nods and one-word answers. She'd found a new dress, a flowing midnight blue gown that skimmed her baby bump and made her feel almost beautiful. As she stood before the mirror, she tried to see the woman Ethan had fallen in love with. The fiery, independent artist with paint-stained fingers and a laugh that could fill a room. Now she saw a stranger with tired eyes and a carefully constructed smile. "You look appropriate," Ethan said, adjusting his tie. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a text message on Ethan's phone, left face up on the bedside table. It was from a name she didn't recognize. Isabel. The message was simple, but it sent a jolt of ice through her veins. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be the one in red. XO. Red. The color of passion, of danger, of a woman who was not his wife. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. It couldn't be. Ethan was a flirt. He was charming, but he wasn't a cheater. Was he? She confronted him, her voice trembling. "Who's Isabel?" Ethan didn't flinch. He picked up his phone, his expression unreadable. "She's a new hire, head of marketing, very talented. And she's coming to the party? Of course. It's a company event." He looked at her then, his eyes cold and hard. "Don't start, Olivia. Not tonight." "The warning was clear. Don't make a scene. Don't tarnish his perfect night. Don't be a problem." As they rode the elevator down to the grand ballroom, a suffocating silence enveloped them. Olivia felt a chasm opening between them, a vast empty space that had been carved out by 1,000 tiny betrayals. The text message was just the final, brutal blow. The party was a dazzling spectacle of success. Champagne flowed, music pulsed, and the air crackled with power and ambition. Ethan was in his element, a king holding court. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his arm possessively around Olivia's waist, a perfect picture of a perfect couple. But Olivia's eyes were scanning the room, searching for a splash of red in a sea of black and blue. And then she saw her. Isabel was everything Olivia was not. She was sharp angles and fiery confidence, her red dress clinging to her like a second skin. She had a laugh that was loud and unapologetic, and when she looked at Ethan, it was with a hunger that Olivia recognized from a lifetime ago. Ethan led Olivia over to her, his smile never faltering. "Olivia, I'd like you to meet Isabel Dubois, our new VP of Marketing. Isabel, this is my wife, Olivia." Isabel's eyes, the color of whiskey, raked over Olivia, lingering for a moment on her pregnant belly. A flicker of something. Triumph? Pity crossed her face before it was replaced by a dazzling smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Ethan has told me so much about you." The words were a poisoned dart, and they hit their mark. Olivia felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at Ethan, at the man she had built her life with, the father of her unborn child, and saw a stranger, a man who could stand beside his pregnant wife and his mistress and feel nothing but the thrill of his own success. In that moment, standing in the heart of her husband's triumph, surrounded by the glittering symbols of their perfect life, Olivia made a decision. It was a quiet, internal shift, a tectonic plate of her soul sliding into a new, unshakable position. She would not be a victim. She would not be a prop. She would not be a fool. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that took both Ethan and Isabel by surprise. "The pleasure is all mine," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm so glad I could be here tonight. It's a night I'll never forget." And as she turned and walked away, leaving her husband and his mistress standing in the wreckage of their lies, she knew it was true. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. Ethan Hayes believed in the power of a good narrative. He had built his empire on it, selling stories of innovation, of a brighter future, of a world made better by his technology. He had also built his life on it, crafting a personal narrative of a self-made man, a devoted husband, a future father. The problem with narratives, however, is that they are fragile things, easily shattered by the harsh light of truth. His affair with Isabel had not been a conscious decision, not a premeditated act of betrayal. It had been a slow, insidious creep, a series of small compromises and rationalizations that had led him to a place he never thought he'd be. It had started with late nights at the office, with shared frustrations and a meeting of minds that felt intoxicatingly new. Isabel was his equal in ambition, his mirror in ruthlessness. She didn't look at him with the soft, adoring eyes of Olivia. She looked at him with a sharp, appraising gaze, challenging him, pushing him, making him feel a thrill he hadn't felt in years. She was the red dress to Olivia's calming blue, the whiskey to her chamomile tea. He told himself it wasn't about sex, though the sex was explosive, a release of pent-up tension and a shared hunger for power. He told himself it was about connection, about finding someone who understood the pressures he was under, the sacrifices he had to make. He told himself he was not a bad man, just a man with complicated needs. The pregnancy had complicated things. He had been genuinely happy at first. The idea of a son, an heir, a continuation of his legacy. But as Olivia's body changed, as she retreated into a world of prenatal appointments and nesting instincts, he had felt a growing sense of alienation. She was becoming a mother, a foreign creature whose concerns about nursery colors and organic baby food seemed trivial in the face of his multi-billion-dollar deal. He loved Olivia. He was sure of that. He loved the idea of her. The beautiful gentlewoman who had been his anchor in the early days. But the reality of her, the quiet disappointment in her eyes, the unspoken accusations that hung in the air between them had become a weight he was desperate to escape. Isabel was his escape. She was a world without consequences, a place where he could be the man he wanted to be, not the man he was expected to be. She didn't want a husband, she wanted a partner in crime. She didn't want a family, she wanted an empire. Bringing her to the party had been a reckless move, a power play born of arrogance and a desire to have it all. He wanted to stand in the center of his universe, with his beautiful pregnant wife on one arm and his brilliant, sexy mistress in the crowd, a testament to his own magnetism. He wanted to prove to himself that he could control all the moving parts of his life, that he was the master of his own narrative. He had underestimated Olivia. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her gentleness for passivity. When she had confronted him about the text message, he had seen a flicker of the old Olivia, the fiery artist he had fallen in love with. But he had quickly extinguished it, confident in his ability to manage her, to smooth things over, to make her see reason. Her smile in the ballroom, the clear, unwavering strength in her voice as she had greeted Isabel, had been a shock to his system. It was not the reaction of a woman who was hurt or angry. It was the reaction of a woman who was done. As she walked away, a ripple of unease had gone through him. He had watched her go, her blue dress a beacon of calm in the chaotic room, and for the first time, he had felt a genuine pang of fear. The narrative was slipping from his grasp. He had tried to recover, to play the part of the gracious host, but the evening had been tainted. He could feel the whispers, the curious glances, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Isabel, sensing his distraction, had become more possessive, her hand lingering on his arm, her laughter a little too loud. "She took that well," Isabel had murmured, a smug curl to her lips. "She's a class act," Ethan had replied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He had left the party early, a rare move for him, feigning a headache. The ride up to the penthouse was a journey into a new, uncertain reality. He had expected to find Olivia crying, to have to deal with the scene, a dramatic confrontation. He had been prepared for that. He had not been prepared for the silence. The apartment was dark, except for a single lamp in the living room, casting long shadows on the marble floor. A suitcase stood by the door. Not his. Hers. Olivia was sitting on the sofa, her hands resting on her belly. She was calm, her face serene, her eyes clear and free of tears. She looked at him as he entered, and he felt like a stranger in his own home. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm not sure yet," she said, her voice even. "My sister's probably, for a while. Olivia, we can talk about this. Don't be dramatic." A small, sad smile touched her lips. Dramatic? Ethan, I have spent the last year of my life being the least dramatic person I know. I have swallowed my feelings. I have ignored my instincts. I have made myself small to make you feel big. I am done being dramatic. I am being honest. She stood up, and for the first time, he saw not just the swell of her pregnancy, but the strength in her posture, the resolve in her eyes. "I saw you tonight, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "I saw you with her. And it wasn't the affair that broke my heart. It was the realization that you don't even see me anymore. I am just a part of the set, a prop in the story you tell yourself about your perfect life." "That's not true," he protested, but the words were hollow, even to his own ears. "Isn't it?" she asked. "You brought your mistress to a party celebrating your success, a party you insisted your pregnant wife attend. What did you think was going to happen? Did you think I was so blind, so stupid, that I wouldn't notice? Or did you just not care?" He had no answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought about it at all. He had been so consumed by his own desires, his own narrative, that he had failed to consider the feelings of the one person who should have mattered most. "I love you," he said, a desperate last-ditch effort to pull the narrative back into his control. She looked at him, and he saw a flicker of the old Olivia, the woman who had loved him with a fierce, all-consuming passion. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a quiet, unshakable sadness. "I know you do," she said, "in your own way. But it's not enough. Not anymore. I need to be more than just a character in your story. I need to be the author of my own." She picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. She didn't look back. The click of the lock was the sound of his perfect world shattering into a million pieces. He was left alone in the gilded cage, the architect of his own destruction, the king of a broken kingdom. The city lights below seemed to mock him, a galaxy of secrets that were no longer his to keep. The future, which had seemed so bright and certain just hours before, was now a terrifying, unknown country. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Hayes had no idea what to do next. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a pressure cooker, and Olivia could feel the heat rising with every passing minute. The air, thick with the cloying scent of lilies and expensive perfume, seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. It was a room full of predators and prey, of calculated smiles and veiled intentions. And tonight, Olivia knew, she was no longer the hunter's unsuspecting prize. She had found a quiet corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights a comforting, anonymous blur. She needed a moment to breathe, to let the reality of her decision settle in her bones. Leaving Ethan was not a choice made in the heat of anger. It was a conclusion reached after a long, painful calculus of the heart. The woman in the red dress was not the cause of the disease. She was merely a symptom of a marriage that had been quietly dying for a long time. From her vantage point, she could see Ethan working the room, his charisma a tangible force. He was a master puppeteer, pulling strings, making connections, his laughter echoing with the confidence of a man who had never known failure. And there, a few feet away, was Isabel, a crimson flame in the sea of muted colors, her eyes fixed on Ethan with a possessive gleam. They were a matched set, two sides of the same tarnished coin. Olivia felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. The pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache beneath her ribs, but it was overlaid with a new, unfamiliar sense of clarity. She saw the party for what it was, a carefully staged performance, a celebration not of innovation, but of ego. Her sister Clara found her by the window, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. Clara was her opposite in every way, pragmatic, sharp-tongued, and fiercely protective. She had never been a fan of Ethan, her skepticism a constant low hum in the background of Olivia's fairy tale romance. "You okay?" Clara asked, her eyes scanning Olivia's face with a practiced concern. I will be, Olivia said, and the words felt true. He's a piece of work, Clara muttered, her gaze flicking towards Ethan and Isabel, who were now standing a little too close, their heads bent together in a conspiratorial whisper. And she looks like she eats men like him for breakfast. Olivia managed a small laugh. She might have to fight me for the leftovers. Clara's eyebrows shot up. There's the sister I know and love. For a while there, I thought the Stepford wife had taken over. She's been evicted, Olivia said, taking a sip of the water. Notice has been served. As if on cue, Ethan's gaze found them across the room. He excused himself from Isabel and started to make his way towards them, his path a slow, deliberate line through the throng of guests. He was coming to manage the situation, to smooth over the cracks, to bring his errant wife back into the fold. Showtime, Clara whispered, giving Olivia's hand a quick squeeze. Let the curtains rise, Olivia replied, her voice steady. Olivia, darling, Ethan began, his voice a smooth, practiced balm. I was worried about you. Are you feeling all right? I've never felt better, she said, her smile unwavering. His eyes flickered to Clara, a silent warning to her sister to stay out of it. Clara, would you excuse us for a moment? I need to speak with my wife. I think I'll stay right here, Clara said, her arms crossed. Olivia might need a translator. Your language seems to be a bit nuanced tonight. A muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a woman he considered a mere footnote in his life. Olivia, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. Don't do this. Not here. Do what, Ethan? Olivia asked, her voice light, almost conversational. Have a conversation with my sister? Or are you worried I might cause a scene? Spoil the narrative? The word narrative hit its mark. He flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but she saw it. This is not the time or the place, he hissed, his grip on her arm tightening. You're right, she said, pulling her arm away with a surprising strength. The time was when you decided to start a relationship with your new VP of marketing. And the place was certainly not our home, the bed we share, the life we built. The color drained from Ethan's face. He had expected tears, recriminations, a messy, emotional outburst. He had not expected this calm, surgical precision, this public dissection of his private sins. The confrontation was no longer a private affair. The people closest to them had started to notice, the volume of the nearby conversations dipping as curious eyes turned their way. The collision was imminent. And then, Isabel arrived, a shark drawn to the scent of blood in the water. She laid a hand on Ethan's arm, her red nails a stark contrast to the white of his shirt. Is everything all right, Ethan? She asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. Everything is just fine, Isabel, Olivia said, turning to face her. We were just discussing the company's new acquisitions. Isabel's smile faltered. She had expected a weeping, hysterical wife, an easy target. She had not expected a queen, calm and composed on her throne of righteous anger. I'm not sure I understand, Isabel said, her eyes darting to Ethan for support. Oh, I think you do, Olivia said, her gaze unwavering. You see, my husband is a collector. He collects companies, he collects accolades, he collects people. But the thing about collections is that sometimes you have to cull the pieces that no longer fit, and I, for one, am no longer interested in being a part of this particular collection. She turned to Ethan, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more devastating than any shout. I want a divorce, Ethan, and I want half of everything. The company, the penthouse, the art collection, half. And I will fight you for every single penny. You wanted a narrative? Here's a new one for you. The scorned wife who takes the billionaire for everything he's worth. I think it has a certain ring to it, don't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stood for the first time in his life, utterly speechless. He was a man who had always had the last word, the perfect comeback, the winning argument. Now, He had nothing. Isabel, realizing she had hitched her wagon to a falling star, slowly backed away, her face a mask of shock and fury. The whispers around them grew louder, the story of the night already being written, the narrative spinning wildly out of Ethan's control. Olivia took Clara's hand, her heart pounding but her spirit soaring. She had done it. She had faced the dragon in his own lair and had not been burned. She had walked into the fire and had come out not as ash, but as a phoenix. As they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of Ethan's perfect party behind them, Olivia did not look back. She was looking forward to a future that was unwritten, a story that was hers and hers alone to tell. The gilded cage was behind her, its doors wide open. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The silence of Clara's guest room was a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of the party. It was a small, unassuming space, with a single bed, a cluttered bookshelf, and a window that looked out onto a quiet, tree-lined street in Lincoln Park. It was a world away from the 87th floor, and for Olivia, it was a sanctuary. The adrenaline of the confrontation had worn off, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. The weight of her decision, of the life she had just detonated, settled upon her like a heavy blanket. She had been brave, she had been strong, but now, in the quiet of the night, the fear began to creep in. She was pregnant. She was alone. And she had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The thought was terrifying. She curled up on the bed, her arms wrapped around her belly, as if to protect her unborn child from the storm that was about to break. Clara came in with a cup of chamomile tea, her face etched with a mixture of pride and concern. She sat on the edge of the bed, her presence a comforting, solid anchor in Olivia's swirling sea of emotions. "You were magnificent," Clara said, her voice soft. "Like Boudica leading the charge against the Romans." Olivia managed a weak smile. "I think Boudica had a better battle plan. Mine was more of a spontaneous combustion." "Sometimes that's the only way," Clara said. "You can't tiptoe away from a forest fire. You have to run." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle hum of the city outside. Olivia's mind raced, replaying the events of the evening, dissecting every word, every look, every nuance. Had she done the right thing? Had she been too harsh? Too impulsive? The questions were a relentless assault, but underneath them, a new, unfamiliar feeling was taking root. A sense of rightness, of a profound and necessary course correction. She had spent so long contorting herself to fit into Ethan's world, to be the woman she thought he wanted her to be. She had forgotten who she was. The next morning, the world exploded. The party, the confrontation, the divorce. It was all over the gossip columns, the business pages, the social media feeds. The narrative that Ethan had so carefully constructed had been hijacked, and a new, more sensational one had taken its place. "Tech Titan's empire crumbles as pregnant wife walks out." Billionaire's betrayal, the mistress, the wife, and the war for half a fortune. Innovate stock plummets amidst founder's scandal. The headlines were brutal, the stories a salacious mix of fact and fiction. Olivia was painted as a tragic heroine, a scorned woman fighting for her and her child's future. Ethan was the villain, the arrogant adulterer who had flown too close to the sun. Isabel was the homewrecker, the ambitious seductress who had gambled and lost. Olivia's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and people she hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, some were curious, some were judgmental. She ignored them all. She needed to be still, to find her footing in this new, uncertain landscape. Ethan, predictably, went into damage control mode. He hired a high-powered PR firm, a team of ruthless lawyers, and issued a statement full of corporate jargon and carefully worded non-apologies. He spoke of personal challenges, of a difficult time for his family, and of his unwavering commitment to his company and its shareholders. He did not mention Olivia's name, but the damage was done. The story was too juicy, the characters too compelling, the stakes too high. The public, hungry for a tale of hubris and downfall, had found its new favorite soap opera. A few days later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Clara's apartment. A man in a tailored suit got out, carrying a briefcase. He was one of Ethan's lawyers, a man with a reptilian smile and cold, dead eyes. He had come with an offer, a settlement designed to make the problem go away. It was a generous offer, a multi-million-dollar trust fund for the child, a luxurious apartment, a lifetime of financial security. All Olivia had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, disappear from the public eye, and let Ethan get on with his life. Olivia listened to the offer, her face impassive. She thought of the gilded cage, of the years she had spent as a beautiful, silent accessory. She thought of the woman in the red dress, of the casual cruelty in Ethan's eyes. She thought of the child growing inside her, a child she wanted to raise in a world of honesty and integrity, not one of secrets and lies. When the lawyer was finished, she looked him in the eye and gave him her answer. No. The lawyer was taken aback. He was not used to being told no. He tried to reason with her, to explain the benefits of the offer, the ugliness of a protracted legal battle. Olivia cut him off. "You can tell your client," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that I am not for sale. I am not a problem to be managed. I am a woman who is fighting for what is rightfully hers, and I will see him in court." The lawyer left, his reptilian smile replaced by a look of grudging respect. Clara, who had been listening from the kitchen, came out with a wide grin on her face. "That," she said, "was even better than Boudica." Olivia smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was being drowned out by a new, more powerful sound. The sound of her own voice, a voice she was finally learning to use. She was no longer Mrs. Ethan Hayes, the billionaire's wife. She was Olivia, the artist, the mother, the survivor. The aftermath was messy, it was painful, it was public. But it was also a cleansing fire, burning away the old dead parts of her life to make way for something new, something real, something true. And as she looked out the window at the quiet, tree-lined street, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was finally, truly, home. Ethan Hayes was a man who thrived in a crisis. He was a fixer, a strategist, a master of turning chaos into opportunity. But the crisis he now faced was of his own making, and the strategies that had served him so well in the boardroom were useless in the ruins of his personal life. The fallout from the party was a tsunami, and he was at its epicenter. The stock price of Innovate, once a soaring rocket, was in a freefall. The board of directors, a group of old conservative men who valued stability above all else, were in a panic. The media was a frenzy of sharks, circling, sensing blood in the water. His PR team worked around the clock, issuing press releases, arranging carefully curated interviews, trying to spin the narrative back in his favor. They painted him as a brilliant but flawed man, a victim of his own success, a man who was deeply committed to making amends. But the public wasn't buying it. The image of his pregnant wife walking out of his party, of his mistress in the red dress, was too powerful, too visceral. It was a story as old as time, and he was cast in the role of the villain. He tried to reason with Olivia, to appeal to their shared history, to the love he still believed they had. He sent her long, rambling emails, full of promises and apologies. He left her desperate, pleading voicemails. He even showed up at Clara's apartment, a bouquet of expensive out-of-season peonies in his hand. She wouldn't see him. She communicated only through her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who seemed to take a personal pleasure in dismantling Ethan's arguments. The settlement offer, the one he had been so sure she would accept, had been a miscalculation, a fatal underestimation of her resolve. Her refusal was not just a rejection of his money, it was a rejection of him, of the power he had always held over her. He was losing control, and the feeling was terrifying. He, who had always been the one to call the shots, was now at the mercy of forces he could not command. His kingdom, the one he had built with his own 2 hands, was crumbling around him. Isabel, the woman he had once seen as his partner in crime, his equal in ambition, was now a liability. She had been fired from Innovate, a sacrifice made to appease the board and the public. She had not taken it well. She called him incessantly, her voice a shrill, accusing whine. She threatened to go to the press, to sell her story, to expose all his secrets. He had to buy her silence, another expensive, messy transaction that left him feeling hollow and disgusted. He was hemorrhaging money, his personal fortune shrinking with every legal bill, every PR invoice, every dip in the stock market. But it was more than just the money. He was losing his identity, his sense of self. He had always been Ethan Hayes, the boy genius, the tech titan, the man who had it all. Now, he was just another tabloid cliché, a rich man brought low by his own arrogance. He found himself wandering the empty rooms of the penthouse, the silence a deafening roar. The jasmine and money scent had been replaced by the stale, stagnant air of regret. He would stand in the nursery, the one he had designed with such meticulous, impersonal care, and stare at the empty crib, a symbol of the future he had so carelessly thrown away. He missed Olivia. He missed her quiet strength, her gentle presence, her unwavering belief in him, even when he didn't deserve it. He had taken her for granted, had seen her as a part of the scenery, a beautiful, comforting backdrop to his own dramatic life. Now that she was gone, he realized she had been the foundation, the thing that had held it all together. One evening, in a fit of desperation and self-pity, he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove to the small, unassuming neighborhood where he had grown up, a world away from the gleaming towers of the city. He parked in front of the small brick house where his parents still lived, the house he had been so desperate to escape. His mother opened the door, her face a mixture of surprise and worry. She was a simple woman, a woman who had never understood his ambition, his relentless drive for more. But she was his mother, and she loved him. She sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done his homework as a child, and made him a cup of tea. She didn't ask him about the headlines, about the scandal, about the divorce. She just sat with him, her presence a quiet, unconditional comfort. "You were always a boy who wanted to touch the sun," she said, her voice soft. "I was always afraid you would get burned." He looked at his hands, the hands that had built an empire, and saw the blisters, the scars, the calluses of a life spent grasping for more. "I think I did, Mom," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I think I did." He told her everything, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of guilt and regret. He told her about Olivia, about Isabel, about the party, about the emptiness of his life. He confessed his sins not to a priest, but to his mother, the one person in the world he could not deceive. She listened without judgment, her hand resting on his. When he was done, she didn't offer him solutions or strategies. She offered him something far more valuable. "You are more than your success, Ethan," she said. "You are more than your mistakes. You are my son, and it is never too late to be a good man." He left his parents' house late that night, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. The city, his city, looked different to him now. It was not a kingdom to be conquered, but a community to be a part of. He knew the road ahead was long and difficult. He had to face the consequences of his actions, to atone for his sins, to rebuild his life from the ground up. He had to let go of the narrative he had created for himself and embrace the messy, complicated truth of who he was. He didn't know if Olivia would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he deserved her forgiveness. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he had to try. He had to become a man worthy of her, a father worthy of their child. The crumbling kingdom was behind him. The path to redemption was ahead. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Hayes was ready to take the first faltering step. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and the slow, painful process of untangling a life that had been so deeply intertwined with another's. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable was happening to Olivia. She was coming back to life. She had moved out of Clara's guest room and into a small, sun-drenched apartment in a quiet, artsy neighborhood. It was a far cry from the penthouse, with its creaky floors and temperamental radiator, but it was hers. It was a space that she could fill with her own things, her own energy, her own dreams. She started painting again. At first, it was just small, hesitant sketches, the muscle memory of her hands slowly returning. But soon, the sketches grew into bold, vibrant canvases, alive with color and emotion. She painted the city, not as a cold, glittering landscape, but as a living, breathing entity, full of stories and secrets. She painted the lake, its surface a constantly changing mirror of her own moods. She painted her own reflection, not as a sad, broken woman, but as a warrior, a survivor, a mother. Her art was her therapy, her sanctuary, her voice. It was a way to process the pain, the anger, the grief, and to transform it into something beautiful, something powerful, something true. She reconnected with old friends, the ones from her life before Ethan, the ones who had known her as Olivia, the artist, not Olivia the billionaire's wife. They welcomed her back with open arms, their easy, unpretentious friendship a balm to her wounded soul. They would gather in her small apartment, drinking cheap wine, eating pizza off paper plates, and talking for hours about art, about life, about everything and nothing. She started teaching a small art class at the local community center, her students a motley crew of retirees, bored housewives, and angsty teenagers. She discovered a passion for teaching, for sharing her love of art, for helping others find their own creative voice. Her pregnancy was a constant, grounding presence. She felt the baby kick. She watched her belly grow. And she fell more and more in love with the tiny person who was a part of her, who was her future. She talked to the baby. She sang to the baby. She read to the baby. She was creating a world for her child, a world of love, of art, of community, a world that had nothing to do with money or power or status. She had good days and bad days. There were days when the weight of the divorce felt unbearable, when the loneliness was a physical ache, when she missed the man she had once loved with all her heart. But even on the bad days, there was a new underlying current of strength, of resilience, of hope. Her lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Albright, was a godsend. She was a fierce, unwavering advocate for Olivia, fighting for her with a tenacity that was both terrifying and inspiring. She shielded Olivia from the worst of the legal battle, allowing her to focus on her health, her art, and her baby. The divorce was messy and public. Ethan's lawyers tried to paint Olivia as a gold digger, a vindictive woman out for revenge. But Ms. Albright was always one step ahead, countering their attacks with a calm, irrefutable logic. And then, something unexpected happened. Ethan changed his strategy. He fired his aggressive legal team and hired a new lawyer, a man known for his collaborative, solution-oriented approach. He stopped fighting her on every point. He agreed to the 50-50 split of their assets, a decision that shocked his own lawyers and sent a ripple of surprise through the legal community. He started sending her things, not through his lawyers, but directly to her apartment, A rare first edition copy of her favorite book, a set of antique hand-carved paintbrushes, a small framed photo of them from the early days, from before the money, before the lies, before the betrayal. There were no notes, no explanations, just the objects themselves. Small, silent offerings of peace. Olivia didn't know what to make of it. Was it another strategy, another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative? Or was it something else? A genuine act of remorse? A first, faltering step towards redemption? She didn't respond. She couldn't. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust too broken. But the gestures, the change in his approach, had planted a tiny, hesitant seed of something she had thought was long dead. Curiosity. Her reawakening was not a straight line. It was a messy, complicated, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of dance. But she was dancing. She was moving. She was alive. One afternoon, as she was putting the finishing touches on a large, abstract painting, a riot of blues and golds and fiery reds, she felt a sudden, sharp contraction. It was time. Clara drove her to the hospital, her hand a comforting presence on Olivia's. As she was wheeled into the delivery room, a wave of fear and excitement washed over her. She was about to meet her child, the person she had been fighting for, the reason for her reawakening. The labor was long and difficult, a testament to the battle she had been through. But she was not alone. Clara was by her side, a fierce, loving coach. And in the quiet moments between contractions, she thought of the paintings she had created, the friendships she had rekindled, the life she had started to build. She thought of her strength, her resilience, her courage. And then, with one final monumental push, her son was born. He was small, he was perfect, and he was hers. As the nurse placed him in her arms, a wave of love so powerful, so overwhelming, washed over her, cleansing her of all the pain, all the anger, all the regret. She looked at her son, at his tiny, perfect face, and she saw her future. It was a future of her own making, a future full of love, of art, of hope. It was a future that had been born from the ashes of her old life, a future that was more beautiful, more real, more true than anything she had ever imagined. She named him Leo, after the lion, a symbol of the strength and courage she had found within herself. He was her reawakening, her masterpiece, her reason for everything. And as she held him close, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Ethan learned of his son's birth from a news alert on his phone. Olivia Hayes, ex-wife of tech mogul Ethan Hayes, gives birth to a baby boy. The headline was a cold, impersonal announcement of the most personal event of his life. He stared at the screen, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Joy, grief, regret, and a profound, aching sense of loss. He was a father. He had a son. And he was a stranger to him. The past few months had been a brutal, humbling education. He had lost his company, his wife, his reputation. He had been forced to confront the man he had become, the architect of his own destruction. His mother's words had been a turning point, a small, flickering candle in the darkness of his self-pity. It is never too late to be a good man. The words had become his mantra, his North Star, his reason for getting up in the morning. He had started the long, arduous process of dismantling his old life and building a new one. He had stepped down as CEO of Innovate, a decision that had been both terrifying and liberating. He had sold the penthouse, the symbol of his gilded cage, and moved into a small, unassuming apartment in a quiet neighborhood. He had started therapy, a process that was as painful as it was necessary. He had been forced to excavate the layers of his own ego, to understand the roots of his ambition, his insecurity, his need for control. He had been forced to face the truth. that his affair with Isabel had not been about passion or connection, but about a deep-seated fear of intimacy, a fear of being truly seen, truly known. He had started to volunteer at a local community center, teaching coding to underprivileged kids. It was a small, humble act of service, a world away from the grand, world-changing ambitions of his past. But it was real. It was meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with money or power or status. He knew that none of this erased the pain he had caused, the damage he had done. He knew that redemption was not a destination, but a journey. A long, winding road with no guarantee of forgiveness at the end. He wanted to be a part of his son's life. The desire was a fierce, primal ache in his chest. But he knew he had no right to it. He had to earn it. He reached out to Olivia, not through lawyers, but with a handwritten letter. He poured his heart out onto the page, his words a raw, unfiltered confession of his guilt, his regret, his hope. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for a second chance. He simply asked if he could see his son. He sent the letter and waited, his heart a tight knot of anxiety. Days turned into weeks. He heard nothing. He began to lose hope, to believe that he had lost his son forever, a just and fitting punishment for his sins. And then, one afternoon, he received a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a tiny sleeping baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. His son, Leo. Underneath the photo, a single word, when. The relief was so overwhelming, he almost collapsed. He arranged to meet Olivia at a small, neutral park, halfway between their two apartments. He saw her from a distance, sitting on a bench, the baby carrier beside her. She looked different, stronger, more at peace. The sadness was still there in the quiet depths of her eyes, but it was overlaid with a new, hard-won serenity. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to say, what to do. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, with years of love and pain and betrayal. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse. "He is," she said, her voice soft but steady. She lifted the baby from the carrier and held him out to Ethan. He took him, his hands trembling. He looked at his son, at his tiny, perfect face, and a wave of love so powerful, so overwhelming washed over him. Tears streamed down his face, tears of joy, of grief, of a love he did not deserve but was so grateful to receive. He had expected anger, recriminations, a list of her grievances. He had not expected this quiet, simple act of grace. "Why?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Because he deserves a father," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And because I believe that people can change. I believe that you can change." It was not forgiveness. It was not a reconciliation. It was something far more precious. It was a chance to be a father, a chance to be a better man. The road to redemption was still long. There were still wounds to be healed, trust to be rebuilt, a future to be navigated. But for the first time, there was hope. He and Olivia started to build a new kind of relationship, one based not on passion or romance, but on a shared love for their son. They met at the park. They took Leo for walks. They celebrated his small, everyday milestones. It was awkward at first, their conversations stilted, their interactions tentative. But slowly, gradually, a new kind of intimacy began to grow, an intimacy born of shared parenthood, of a mutual desire to do what was best for their child. Ethan learned to be a father. He learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to soothe a crying baby. He learned to be present, to be patient, to be selfless. He learned to love in a way he had never loved before, a love that was not about possession or control, but about service and sacrifice. He watched Olivia with a new sense of awe and respect. He saw the mother she had become, the artist she had always been, the strong, independent woman who had risen from the ashes of the life he had destroyed. He knew he would never be worthy of her, but he would spend the rest of his life trying to be. One day, as they were sitting on the park bench, watching Leo take his first wobbly steps, Olivia turned to him, a small, hesitant smile on her face. "I saw your new collection," she said, referring to a small independent art gallery that had recently started to show his work. "It's good, really good." The compliment, so simple, so unexpected, meant more to him than all the accolades, all the awards, all the billions of dollars he had ever earned. It was a sign that she saw him, the real him, the man he was trying to become. The road to redemption was long, and he was still a long way from its end. But he was on the right path. He had his son, he had a second chance, and he had hope. And for Ethan Hayes, the man who had once had everything and had lost it all, that was more than enough. It was everything. The story of Ethan and Olivia is a journey through the wreckage of betrayal to the shores of redemption. It's a reminder that our choices define us, but they don't have to be our final chapter. From the glittering heights of a Chicago penthouse to the quiet humility of a park bench, their lives were reshaped by a single devastating decision. But in the end, it wasn't the fall that mattered, but the slow, painful, and ultimately beautiful act of getting back up. It's a story of heartbreak, healing, and the enduring power of hope. What did you think of their journey? Could you forgive Ethan? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and the incredible strength of the human heart.